We're going to use another application from Concord Consortium. If you can't get it to work on your computer, that's okay. You should be able to answer all of the questions from the video and the worksheet. We're going to start out on page 1 and find out more about ATP. Have you ever wondered how we can get energy from so many different kinds of foods? We can break down the energy in apples, chocolate bars, carrots, beef. It turns out almost everything we eat is made from carbohydrates, fats, or proteins, so most food can be broken down into these 3 kinds of substances. However, it would be even more efficient if all the different chemical reactions in our body could use one common fuel. They do. It's called adenosine triphosphate. The energy stored in carbohydrates, fats, and proteins is eventually used to create ATP, a high-energy molecule that's made in almost every cell and is the fuel needed by most biological processes. Now that sounds a lot like an answer to the question here. Let's scroll down a little bit more and find out more about ATP. It's called triphosphate because it has 3 phosphate groups here. We can see that it's similar to the DNA nucleotide DAMAP, or A in the GATC of DNA, the nucleotides. Atoms not dimmed make up the DAMP molecule in DNA, so right here it's just short these 2 phosphates. Speaking of phosphates, there are 3 of them. It's the last one that we're interested in because of the bond between number 2 and number 3. There's a bit of a repulsion because they're negative. The weak bond right here means it's high energy. So when you break this bond, energy is released. So now we've answered the first 3 questions. We know what is ATP and why is it important. It's adenosine triphosphate, and it fuels all the reactions in the cell. How many phosphate groups are part of the ATP? Well, it's adenosine triphosphate, just like a tricycle has 3 wheels. Tri means 3. Why does the ATP molecule have a great deal of chemical energy? Well, it's about that weak bond between phosphate 2 and phosphate 3. Let's find out the answers to questions 4, 5, and 6 on the next page of the simulation. So now we're on page 2 of the simulation. We're looking at the big question is, how is our primary fuel, glucose from carbohydrates, initially processed to set up the production of adenosine triphosphate, or ATP? This is really important, so let's read this out loud together. The first step in breaking down glucose is to convert each glucose molecule into 2 pyruvate molecules. This process is called glycolysis and takes 10 chemical reactions to get there. Don't worry, I'm not going to make you memorize all of the 10 reactions. Along the way, some ATP is used up to get the process started. Just like sometimes you have to strike a match to light your wood on fire, you need a little bit of energy to get things going, and that's what needs to happen with glycolysis. You need a couple ATPs, you need to kind of burn a couple ATPs to get that going. Additionally, some NADH molecules, which have high energy, are also made, and those later will be used to make even more ATP. So the reactions below, we're going to click on them and we're going to look for these high energy molecules being produced, ATP and NADH. We're also going to look for ATP that is put into the process. Let's first slide sideways though and look at all of those reactions. Each of those reactions is catalyzed by an enzyme. And the first question asks how many enzymes there are. Remember, an enzyme is a protein that has a very particular structure that helps hold the reactants and hold them in a certain way so that they react in the way we want them to. So step 1 has an enzyme. Step 2 has an enzyme. We'll take a closer look at these in part 2 of respiration. Step 3 has an enzyme. Step 4 has an enzyme. Step 5 has an enzyme. Step 6 has an enzyme. So does step 7, 8, 9, and 10. So you can see the importance of enzymes in your body. You need 10 different enzymes to produce ATP just in glycolysis. So enzymes are very important to glycolysis and cellular respiration in general. Let's look at some of these 10 steps. If we look at the first step here, ATP is used up. We have ATP in the beginning. The reactants are the initial ingredients for the reaction. ATP is here, and then it's turned into ADP on the product side, or the end result of the reaction. Let's keep going and see what other high energy molecules we see. Step 2, don't see any high energy molecules there. Nothing's used up or added. Step 3, we use up another ATP. It's here in the reactants, but it's turned into ADP in the products. Step 4, we cut sugar in half. That's a very sort of karate chop step. Step 5, we've got the 2 little molecules, and they're turned both into GADP, and this happens twice. Oh, here we go. Here's an NADH molecule produced. So there we get a ATP or a high energy molecule that is produced. And since this is happening, since there are 2 GADPs produced for every glucose, we get 2 NADHs. Bonus. Step 7. All right, finally we're producing some ATP. So we have 2 ATP produced here because this reaction is happening twice for every glucose molecule. So far we've used up 2 ATP in steps 1 and 3, and now we've created 2 ATPs, so we're kind of neutral for ATP now. Step 8 doesn't have any high energy molecules involved. Step 9 produces some water, but no high energy molecules. And step 10 produces 2 more ATPs. So the net result, after we've spent 2 ATPs to start the process and then created some, our net result, our end product, is 2 ATPs plus 2 NADHs. So now it's time to do some molecular accounting. In the first reaction, there's ATP as a reactant and an ATP as a product. What happened? Well, the answer's right here, and we talked about we needed to put some energy into the process to get it going, just like you light a match to start a fire in your fireplace. The 10 steps of glycolysis we went through, we scrolled through one at a time to look for all the high energy molecules, and we also noticed that each step has its own enzyme. So that should help you answer number 5. If you want to go through and write down all of those enzymes by name in purple, you can earn some bonus points. So now we want to know what is the net product of glycolysis. So we talked about that 2 ATP got used up. We produced 4 ATP, so 4 minus 2 that we used up ends up with 2 ADP, plus we produced those 2 NADH molecules, plus we produced pyruvate, which is a molecule that will go to the next stage of cellular respiration. It will go into the mitochondria where the Krebs cycle goes on to produce even more ATP out of this pyruvate and NADH. Glycolysis uses up some ATP and makes some ATP. Overall, glycolysis makes more ATP than it uses. How much ATP is made overall? So we made 4 total. We used 2 in the beginning, so 4 minus 2 is 2. The high energy NADH is also created during glycolysis. The energy in the NADH molecules will be used to make more ATP later. How many NADH molecules are produced during glycolysis? Well, we saw NADH once in the process, but we saw that little times 2 in the bottom. Each NADH molecule produced in glycolysis eventually is used to produce 2 ATP molecules. Given that some ATP is used up, some ATP is produced, and some NADH is produced that eventually becomes ATP, how much ATP overall is produced through glycolysis? Well, let's do a little molecular counting again. We made 4 ATP molecules. We used up 2 ATP molecules in the very beginning. We also created 2 NADH molecules, which each are responsible, each of the NADH molecules will produce 2 times 2, 4 ATP molecules. So altogether, we've got this many ATP molecules. I think you can figure it out from here. Glycolysis uses up some high energy molecules and makes some high energy molecules. Overall, does the process of glycolysis, breaking down glucose to make ATP, does that use up energy in the cell, or does it make more energy available to the cell? Think about that. Remember, there's this many ATPs that are produced as a result of glycolysis, and that's a way of making energy available to the cell. ATP is a nice high energy molecule, and when the cell breaks it down into ATP, energy is released for cell processes. All right, now you have the answer for 1 through 10, and you can watch the part 3 video to get through experimenting with photosynthesis. Thanks so much for watching. This is Miss R signing off on part 2 of Lab 3.18.